Meaningful learning is not about good teaching, but about a complex interaction of variables in and around the learning environment. Often we may not think about these interactions, or we focus on only a few as we design, develop, and deliver our course materials. However, incorporating universal design for learning as part of the design framework you use can result in paying more attention to these interactions and variables. Incorporating universal design for learning is not necessarily easy. By design, it takes more work up front, but with the intent that there will be less need for adjustment once your instruction is underway. Universal design is not a separate step in the course design development process. Rather, you will need to reference UDL throughout the process. More specifically, as an instructor, you will evaluate your course aims, activities, assessments, and consider the variables within the learning atmosphere or the environment. When doing so, you will reflect, who are my learners? In what ways do they learn? Will these activities achieve my objectives? Do they minimize the need for later adjustment? Do my learning outcomes result in excluding different learners? Is my wording clear, concise, and unambiguous? Are my graphic elements clear, readable, scalable in size? Is my assessment plan flexible to allow for adjustments without difficulty, but also without compromising essential outcomes? On top of this, you need to maintain the academic integrity of your course and ensure that it still meets all essential learning outcomes as identified by your department. For some, the notion of UDL means a dumbing down of the curriculum, making things easier. The opposite is actually true. Done well, UDL does not change the rigor of your classroom and often increases the learning potential of your activities. For example, captioned videos not only provide access for students who are deaf, but also increases linguistic access for English language learners in your classroom. In effect, by having your videos captioned, you have created a more inclusive learning atmosphere. This leads us to the first essential consideration for universal design for learning. Give yourself enough time to do it well. Allocate enough time. UDL isn't rocket science, but it feels like it is. Learn about UDL, move beyond the jargon to understanding what it means. Consider how the principles may apply in your class and incorporate what you can as it makes sense to you. Consult with your colleagues, the diversity office, the disability services representative. Discuss ways to determine what is essential in your class and how to make it meaningfully accessible. Incorporating inclusive design shouldn't feel unnatural to you. It will come across as such to students. This means you may have to make changes to your course a few steps at a time. As you consider to continue to develop a deeper understanding of UDL and how it can be applied to your course, you can then continue to revisit, revise, and adjust. The second point, strive for clear, unambiguous, and specific language in your written and spoken guidance to students. And then ensure your students know what you're saying rather than assuming they do. Structure your syllabus in a manner that it becomes part of the learning process. Avoid having a simple iteration of requirements and due dates. Use it as one of the first tools to set the tone for your course and a means to establish your classroom as an inclusive learning environment. Moreover, numerous online resources discuss creating a universally designed syllabus. Consider reviewing them before you finalize your syllabus. In the classroom, use descriptive language as you are able. For example, in a math class, if you are writing on the board, consider verbalizing what you are writing rather than just writing an equation for people to see. The next point is to start small. Look at the obvious barriers to effectively conveying your information. Typically, these are found in your syllabi, presentation slides, and group discussions. The next few slides will provide several examples of how to adjust slides for increased accessibility, and also a slide on adjusting a learning activity that increases access and overall student learning. The last point, have a plan to minimize physical barriers in the classroom before you get to the room. This isn't just a consideration for wheelchair users, but it allows you to use your space to create a learning environment that is relevant to the material, welcoming, inclusive, and ultimately will facilitate classroom engagement that meets your learning outcomes. Now here are a few examples of how to start small. We want to simplify. We want to convey information in a concise and meaningful manner. Now this slide I'm presenting right here is from a marketing class. We're not quite sure what is essential. We're not quite sure what the instructor really is trying to convey. It is a very complex slide. It contains a significant amount of information, and we're not sure of where it goes or what the intent is. This particular slide takes complex information and reformats it in a way that creates a flow of information. So while it has this flow process, I can still take that and make it into a linear written description if I need to provide that to a student with a disability. The explanations on the right are clear, concise, and readable. I have clarified complex information in a way that is meaningful for students. The next type of slide set is to clarify what I'm trying to get across, of what is essential, what is necessary for learning, and can everyone access the information. This is an example from a biochemistry class. This slide comes directly from the publisher. It contains 4 molecular models. When we're asking the instructor what's essential, the key thing to remember is not everything on a particular slide is essential to the teaching and learning that's going on at that moment. So once we identified what's essential, the rest of the information on the slide is simply visual clutter. It can confuse not only a student with a disability, but it can confuse every other student in the class that's trying to make sense of what that information is, rather than to focus on that particular part of the slide that is meaningful to the teaching and learning process. So not only in this image have we cut out that particular molecular model, we've enlarged it and clarified the print, so now that it is accessible for students, they can see it from the front to the back of the class, and it's scalable once they print it out. The next piece, and the final one I want to address, is about inclusion. We want to include those with differing learning needs in a way that does not make them the center of attention in the classroom, or we want to create inclusion that feels right for everyone. So in this particular example, I had a blind student in a class that was based on multicultural teaching and learning. The students needed to do writing, and the instructor provided visual items, artwork, pictures of sculptures that students were to respond to that would stimulate their writing for that particular class period. Now the challenge was all the inspiration for the writing was visual, graphically represented. And with the blind student in the class, the instructor came to me and said, how can I do this? How can I make this meaningful for the student? So when we asked the question, what's essential? And we discussed, is it essential for the students to be creative and descriptive? Yes. It is essential for the students to have an opportunity to look at artwork from differing perspectives and make personal meaning. Yes. Is it possible then to pick 3, 4, or 5 students each time an image is presented to give their verbal description of what they see? It could be a specific iteration of what it is physically, or it might be an intuitive description of that. But the students would share in the class for all the students to hear and understand these differing perspectives, and the student who was blind in the class no longer needed an additional access support. He could fully participate in the classroom, and at the end of the course, both the student and the instructor said this did not compromise anything essential and created a more welcoming, inclusive learning experience. Now, to summarize, as these few examples have shown, creating access does not dumb down the curriculum, but in fact increases learner access to the information and promotes a more inclusive, barrier-free learning environment. Universal design for learning is not always this clear and direct as these few examples show, but these are ways of thinking broadly and collaborating. You can be a vital partner in advancing access